I should apologize to the neighboring countries that were attacked by Iran on my own behalf. What happened was that our commanders and our leader lost their lives following barbaric aggression, and our armed forces, the champions that are sacrificing their lives to defend our territorial integrity, fired at will because their commanders were absent and did whatever was necessary.
So following up from our last video, I now want to discuss the current state of the Iranian government, where things are beginning to look really interesting. I think you are watching their leadership structure begin to fracture into two separate camps. On one hand, we have the maybe more moderate and practical faction that is seeking to find a way to potentially sue for peace and bring about an end to this war. And then on the other hand, we have the radical ideological fanatic faction who will carry on this jihad till the very end. They don't care how bad they're losing. They don't care how many other Muslim countries they're provoking and dragging into this conflict against them. They're going to do what they're going to do. And what's noteworthy now is that these two separate camps are beginning to openly clash with and even publicly call one another out, which does seem to suggest some pretty strong internal tension and division going on behind the scenes. As we speculated, following the death of the supreme leader, no matter how much unity the Iranian government seeks to portray, it is the simple reality. A massive power vacuum was left behind, with many different factions now vying for control. You have the Revolutionary Guard on one hand. You have the Islamic clergy and the newly appointed supreme leader who, yes, is there, but is he seen as fully legitimate? Do people really trust his credibility? You also have the mainline military, and then you have the more bureaucratic political side of the government who also wants a say in this. And so a lot of chaos here is quietly unfolding. I would not be surprised if we watch some type of attempt at a military coup or even a mini civil war here break out within the government in the coming few days, again, following that power vacuum that has been left behind. And as it pertains to the success of Operation Epic Fury, I think it is going to be very important to take notes of who ends up winning this power struggle, and can some use of American or Israeli force tip the power balance in a way that is ultimately favorable to the Western side of this conflict. We'll talk about all of that here today, guys, and this current clash between the president of Iran and the Revolutionary Guard that we will explain. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all the latest news and coverage. And that said, this all begins in our last video when we briefly mentioned how the president of Iran, a guy by the name of Pezeshkian, if I'm saying that correctly, basically tried to issue a de facto apology to Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the Gulf states that we notably covered Iran was bombing and striking during this conflict. And we pointed out why that was such a mistake to provoke the rest of the Muslim world, because here you're talking about countries that were formerly neutral. Now you've actually angered them. You've turned them against you. They're now getting involved in the striking and the fighting against Iran.
I think this was a very foolish mistake by Iran. Iran makes these mistakes all the time in its negotiations, in its dealings with its neighbors. I've often found that one is surprised at how clumsy they are. They should never have attacked the Gulf states, in particular Saudi Arabia. The Gulf states had made clear they did not want any part of this military operation. They had said bases couldn't be used. Some of them had said airspace can't be used. They had privately counseled President Trump not to do this attack. What the Iranians should have done was driven a wedge between the United States and the Gulf states, and made clear that they did not view the Gulf states as responsible for this. Instead, by foolishly attacking the Gulf states, they have joined together those states.
And so what the president tried to come out and say is that we are going to stand down and we're going to stop attacking the Arab Gulf state Muslim countries. The quote reads the following, right? The Temporary Leadership Council approved yesterday that there will be no more attacks on neighboring countries and no missile launches unless an attack originates from those countries against Iran. And so what this clearly seemed to be, and what Trump even noted, was this is sort of a desperate attempt to save face on behalf of Iran, try to scale back the conflict, hoping maybe, if they'll get some sympathy from the Gulf states and this won't get too bad for them. And definitely it signaled a sign of weakness for sure. And maybe, right, the president of Iran trying to make some type of symbolic gesture at diplomacy. And frankly, it was a little bit surprising given, usually what you hear out of Iran are these crazy, aggressive ideological statements. But again, that is what the Temporary Leadership Council, aka the provisional government, had approved. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it appears just hours later today, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard has openly revolted against that. They issued a public statement saying, we will not be following the president's orders, and the president is wrong. And then they actually followed through in striking Dubai today and openly defying, right? It wasn't even just a verbal thing. They started launching missiles at the other Gulf states in defiance of the new provisional government. So you can see clearly, right? Something's going on here. A lot of chaos, a lot of internal dispute for sure. Here is what the IRGC allegedly said on Telegram, saying, quote, President Pezeshkian made a mistake saying he won't attack neighboring countries, and our force demonstrated his mistake. His comments were 5 hours ago, and since then, Dubai and Abu Dhabi are being struck. Ignore the president's words during the war. That is right. We just saw the Iranian Revolutionary Guard tell their people on Telegram to ignore the words of that very country's sitting president. This looks like the beginning, yes, right, of a military coup. And what I explained going into this was that, I hate comparing everything to Nazi Germany or World War II, but I think it's actually, in this case, genuinely the best analogy so that people can understand. If you imagine Iran sort of similar to that leadership structure from that war, you could make a strong comparison that the IRGC is basically like the Nazi SS. They're actually almost identical to that, right? They're the very rabidly, ideologically fanatic faction of the government. They're sort of a paramilitary force where they're both political and military at the same time. And then you're talking about the special elite forces. Again, so so the analogy we can make to this whole scenario right now is that imagine if Hitler were taken out during World War II, and now you see basically the military generals of Nazi Germany or the kind of more moderate factions of the government try to make a sue for peace with the Western allies, and then the Nazi SS is basically coming in here and saying, no, that's not going to happen, and then they're couing the government, and then basically what would happen next, right? The country would face potentially some type of civil war that could ultimately figure and settle that all out in the end, right? I would make the analogy here. That's, of course, what's happening. And it is, frankly, also, I would say at the same time concerning, right? I raised the issue before that, well, one thing you cannot allow to happen, one thing that will negate all the progress we made in Epic Fury is that in the power vacuum of all of this, the IRGC ends up taking power, okay? Because again, they're crazier even arguably than the past supreme leader and the Islamic clergy is, so you don't want that to be happening either. But, it is good at the same time, right, to watch the government in a little bit of disarray. So it's good that the IRGC, yes, is causing division. At the same time, we certainly do not want them in the end taking power over the government. But again, this sort of shows the instability in the power vacuum that, hey, who's really running the country right now? Again, despite no matter how much the Iranian leaders try to portray unity, nobody really knows, right? That's the simple reality. And we are seeing even Iranian political and media figures likewise criticize their own president after he apologized to the Gulf states for these attacks. In a video message published earlier in the day, the president said authorities had ordered the armed forces to halt missile strikes on neighboring countries unless attacks originate from their territory. And then we're watching now lawmakers push back. This guy here, Mohammad Manan Razi, a lawmaker representing Qom, described the remarks as humiliating and said they showed the assembly of experts should quickly move to select a new leader, saying, quote, did neighboring countries not place their land, assets, and hotels at the disposal of our enemies? So this guy is basically saying here, right? No, by allowing America to have military bases, countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, they already made this grave for themselves. And so, they're the traitors and we should be fighting the war with them. So the president clearly trying to say, hey, let's scale this back a little bit. Maybe we can find an angle to end the war. No. Other factions of the government saying absolutely not. And then likewise, the head of the Parliament and National Security and Foreign Policy Committee wrote on X that all U.S. and Israeli bases in the region were legitimate and lawful targets in the ongoing conflict. Media figures, state-run media likewise in Iran, began to question the message. This guy says, we did not understand what happened. So they have absolutely no idea. But then another one, why retreat from the military strategy when we are on the verge of selecting a new leader? Any ceasefire is treason, according to another media figure. So yeah, certainly a lot of chaos here happening behind the scenes. Although I have to say, whether or not Iran chooses to keep firing missiles at the Middle East or they stand down, it doesn't ultimately matter, because the point we've raised in recent days is that they're basically out of missiles. And as we speak, the current barrage that they're sending over towards American and Middle Eastern targets has now plummeted from nearly 100 missiles a day to just 8 missiles. So just keep in mind, as you watch their government internally feud over this, at the end of the day, they're arguing over missile strikes that aren't really happening. And so, again, to make the World War II analogy, sort of like the last days in the bunker where the mustache man is moving around forces that don't exist, right? If Steiner's attacked, he's going to save it all. They're sort of bickering here over things that ultimately are irrelevant.
The Iranian strategy comes down to this: hunker down and wait for America to lose its will, and hit the Arabs and hit the oil to drive up the costs to the alliance. They're losing the war, so they're waging an economic war as a last resort. Their military is nearly neutered. They went from 100 missiles firing a day yesterday. They launched 8. Their fighter jets are Vietnam era. We're fighting a next generation war with a country still stuck in the 60s. Trump's in no rush. He tells Time magazine this: I have no time limits on anything. I want to get it done. The president wants us to keep going.
And by the way, I think it is just simply true. As of right now, yes, you have to keep going. You have to keep the pressure up. Why? I know that some recently have called for Trump to end the war. It's done. You made your point. You won. What else do you have to prove? Well, it's not about what we don't or do have to prove. It's about the fact that you don't want this whole operation to ultimately have been in vain and been for nothing, which is to say what? It would be a catastrophic loss to simply pull out right now and allow the IRGC, as one example, to engage in a military coup of the government and then govern significantly more radically than even the Ayatollah was, and potentially even be more militaristic. And who knows, maybe they won't even stop shooting off the missiles at us, right? That is a concern. That is something that you have to avoid, because here's the reality, okay? In a sense, we already got what we want, because the Ayatollah's taken out, the top leadership's taken out. Their government, yes, is sort of in this disarray chaos state at the moment. Okay, so there's a lot of opportunities for a lot of different factions to rise to the top. However, you certainly do not want the wrong faction rising to the top, and that's something you have to keep an eye on. Like, don't get me wrong, okay? It might not mean long-term we continue to keep bombing in the way we have, but certainly we have to take a vested interest right now in Iran's politics, because again, why? You don't want this all to be for nothing. That said, President Trump did issue a statement earlier today saying that he was going to significantly ramp up the attacks and that Iran would be hit hard today. We did see the signs of that after Iran's oil depots are apparently violently burning after being struck by Israeli forces. Here is one video of that. Here is another angle, likewise. So a lot of oil infrastructure was hit today. So in other words, what are we doing? So in the first week, we crippled Iran's military infrastructure and capacity. Now what are we going after, right, folks? The economic side of it. So, that's definitely something to keep an eye on here. And of course, we have President Trump pointing out the current predicament that Iran is actually in.
He said I'd give it a 12 to a 15. Their army is gone. They're just about, look, their navy is gone. Their communications are gone. Their leaders are gone. 2 sets of their leaders are gone. They're down to their 3rd set. Their air force is wiped out entirely. Think of it. They have 32 ships. All 32 are at the bottom of the ocean. Other than that, they're doing very well, Coach. Very well. We're doing, our military is doing phenomenally. That's the big thing for this week. We seem to have a new thing every week, but the situation with a very bad and very sick group of leaders.
So look, here's the way I see it, is that if you are currently one of the remnants of the government left in Iran, and you're obviously trying to vie for power and control with a bunch of other factions, you should come to the practical, self-interested realization that it is actually in your own best interest to pursue peace with the United States, even if that means giving Trump a lot of what he wants, because at the end of the day, what is the alternative? You are getting decimated militarily, and sure, you could try to make the case that, well, maybe we'll try to ride the storm and hold out because the political situation in America won't be conducive enough for a long-term war. And sure, that part may be true, but here's the other question I might have for Iran as well. Do you want to simply survive, or do you also want to prosper and flourish? Because it is secondly the reality that actually the lifting of Western sanctions and the opening up of Iranian oil to Western markets would greatly benefit their country. It would make them a lot of money. It allows a lot of chances, by the way, for Persia to finally become a successful country again, which they were before this radical ideological regime took over. But of course, here's the problem at the same time. What's stopping them from doing that? Let's be honest. Why won't they just say, okay, America, have what you want. Actually, we want to kind of be reintegrated into the West as we were before. You're actually a much better partner, end of the day, than a country like China is. Well, of course, here is the issue with that. Is number one, it's ego, right? A lot of these leaders don't want to look like the ones who surrendered or capitulated to the United States. That's true. And then secondly is the ideology, right? You know, they can't just simply surrender the whole death to America thing because that's what they're all about. But here's the thing. Can we find that maybe one guy in the government who is practical and level-headed enough? Sure, maybe he took a career in politics because he knew he would be successful or something, but he doesn't believe the Islamic Revolution stuff as much as the Ayatollah did, right? Maybe he's a little bit younger. He has some fresher ideas, right? Can we just find that one person in the government who's willing to say, okay, I'm willing to give America a chance. I'm willing to give peace and opening up a chance. And then can that person prevail over fanatics like, say, in the Revolutionary Guard? That is the current concern. That is the current issue, right? I guess simultaneously, you could just bomb the entire Iranian government till there's literally no one left. But still, at the end of the day, someone's going to have to take control in Iran. So this is going to be the big thing to watch. But again, as we currently speak, a lot of internal conflict going on, right? Some people are saying, let's try to make peace. Some people just want to keep on making war. Very interested to see here what ends up happening. I mean, after all, you could, just bomb the people who claim they want to make war. I mean, that's obviously what they're calling for anyway. And I guess that would solve a lot of your problems, right? But I don't know. We'll see what happens, guys. Again, just wanted to give you that update here on the current state of their government. That said, let us know your thoughts on this, guys, in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.